Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
To the people of Surrey, I love you.
Not guilty. Former Surrey Mayor Doug McCallum is acquitted in his public mischief trial. A former daycare operator is sentenced to jail after a toddler died in her care 5 years ago.
We have to have the shared goal of delivering housing for British Columbians who need that housing.
And the Premier outlines new plans to build more housing in BC by ending rental restrictions and setting building targets.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Anita is away tonight. Surrey's former mayor was vindicated in provincial court today. Doug McCallum was found not guilty of public mischief after being accused of lying to police and falsely accusing a political opponent. As Michelle Gassoub tells us, the judge determined the physical and medical evidence proved McCallum's foot was run over.
As the judge read the verdict of not guilty this morning, there were dramatic reactions in court, with some people gasping in dismay, others crying a tear of relief. The question at the center of this much-watched trial: did the former Surrey mayor intentionally mislead police when he said his foot was run over by Debbie Johnstone? It took around an hour for Judge Reginald Harris to read his decision. In the end, saying the Crown hadn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt that McCallum had lied to police, and saying the physical and medical evidence indicated the 78-year-old's foot had been run over. McCallum gave only a brief statement, saying he was pleased with the verdict.
To the people of Surrey, I love you. I love all of you. Thank you.
McCallum didn't respond to reporter questions, but former Surrey City Councillor Laurie Guerra, who testified in the trial, spoke about the impact on his family.
When you're a Surrey resident and you're a law-abiding citizen, you think, wow, they must have something really big. Guess what? They didn't have anything really big. So where does that leave us? That begs the question, why do this? I'm really emotional because I just sat by the previous mayor, Doug McCallum's daughter, in the court and heard her just bawl. You know, they've been through so much.
Debbie Johnstone, the Keep the RCMP in Surrey campaigner at the center of this case, was not in court today, though many of her supporters were in the gallery. And while the trial has wrapped, the not guilty verdict leaves open the question of whether or not the city of Surrey will now be forced to foot McCallum's legal bills. With today's verdict, the drama swirling around the former mayor of Surrey is over for now, though the future of policing in the city still up for debate. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Surrey.
A former Vancouver daycare operator has now been sentenced to almost 2 years in jail after a toddler died in her care. Susie Sod pleaded guilty to failing to provide the necessaries of life for 9 children she was looking after, including the boy known as Baby Mac. As the CBC's Josh Grant reports, Mac's parents say the sentence falls years short, and a warning: the story does contain details some viewers may find distressing.
Susie Yasmin Sod was handcuffed and led out of BC Supreme Court early this afternoon. Justice Catherine Wedge told the Vancouver courtroom Sod deliberately deceived the parents whose children she cared for, crafting an elaborate scheme at her unlicensed East Vancouver daycare to make more money by caring for more children than was legally allowed. The court heard that Sod refused to let parents inside the daycare during operating hours and lied about the daycare's numbers. She would meet parents at the front or back door to hand over their children, not wanting them to see how many were actually inside. Under BC's Community Care and Assisted Living Act, unlicensed childcare operators can only care for 2 children at a time. When 16-month-old McCallan Wayne Sani died in Sod's care, she was watching 9 children. Baby Mac's parents were at Wednesday's hearing. His mother, Shelley Shepard, struggled to contain her emotions when Wedge described what happened on January 18, 2017. Wedge said Sod told police she put Baby Mac down for a nap that afternoon because he was sick. She left him unattended on the 3rd floor for over an hour with no audio or video monitor. When Shepard texted to say she was coming to pick him up, Sod found Baby Mac blue and unresponsive in a playpen. Saad told police that a set of string lights were dangling near the playpen. A 2018 lawsuit filed by Shepherd said he was believed to have died from choking on an electrical cord. In a statement, Mac's parents say, "No punishment will ever bring our sweet boy back to us. We feel this sentence falls years short and is grossly feeble in its severity." His parents regret that he will never get to score a goal in soccer, have a sleepover with friends, learn to clean a fish, experience the thrill of a first kiss. They say they miss Mac every day. Josh Grant, CBC News, Vancouver.
Kelowna RCMP, meanwhile, are investigating the sudden death of a toddler. Police, ambulance, and fire were called to a home on Richter Street shortly after noon yesterday. Inside, they found an 18-month-old child dead. Mounties, the coroner, and the Ministry of Children and Family Development are now looking into their death. Police in Prince Rupert say a woman is dead and a man is in critical condition after a shooting at an office mall this morning. Mounties say a 44-year-old man entered Ocean Centre Mall around 8:30 and shot a woman before turning the gun on himself. Mounties say the man knew the woman he killed. Business owners in the strip mall heard gunfire and they called 911. Prince Rupert's mayor says his office in City Hall was locked down for a time and a lot of staff knew the people involved. Premier David Eby has also offered his condolences to those affected. Officials are asking people to avoid the mall area. Two gun-wielding robbers held up staff and customers at a popular Commercial Drive cafe yesterday morning. Vancouver police say the two suspects raided the Café du Soleil at the height of the brunch run, leaving more than a dozen people traumatized. The robbers aimed weapons at workers and customers, taking cell phones and valuables before they took off in a vehicle. One person did suffer minor injuries. Both suspects were wearing hats, hoodies, and gloves to obscure their identities. Anyone with information is asked to contact Vancouver police. Mounties in Surrey, meanwhile, are looking into the discovery of a handgun at a high school on Friday. Sullivan Heights Secondary School staff first saw the gun in an image posted on social media before they actually found it on school property. They notified parents and are working with Surrey Safe Schools to educate students on safety and reporting any concerning incidents. To other news now, Premier David Eby has announced plans meant to free up rental supply and work with cities to build more housing in BC. The Housing Supply Act will set out targets for municipalities. And as Mira Baines reports, under the new law, the province will have some teeth to enforce the rules if cities don't comply.
Premier David Eby says the Housing Supply Act lays a framework for creating more housing supply and the relationship between the province and cities to build more homes.
If there's an issue that's beyond their control, let's identify it. Let's address it together.
Likely the most contentious housing bill will be the Housing Supply Act, which allows the province to set housing targets and enforcement tools if cities don't comply.
We don't go immediately to stepping into a community and saying, you must approve this, you must approve that.
Eby says the province will coordinate with cities to support them as they create more supply, including affordable units. Cities will be required to submit housing reports to the provincial government every 5 years. The legislation will be brought into force in mid-2023.
We'll be starting with 8 to 10 municipalities with the greatest need and the highest projected growth. This legislation will help us create more housing where it's needed most.
Newly elected mayors and councillors across BC are taking a wait-and-see approach.
There will be a wide range of how this affects different communities, and some members will welcome greater provincial involvement, and others will be wary.
The BC government also has plans to amend the Strata Act to ban rental restriction bylaws to free up housing supply. It could affect roughly 3,000 units immediately. However, restrictions will be allowed for 55 and plus buildings and restrictions that ban short-term Airbnb rentals. But some think the housing supply problems are simply going to be made worse.
But it's just going to simply mean that when a unit comes up for sale, it's not going to be purchased by another occupant that's going to live there. It's going to be purchased by a speculator, and we're going to end up having more competition for these units.
The BC Liberals say the housing legislation is too timid by setting targets for cities instead of concrete actions. Still, Eby is hoping to push through several pieces of legislation by the end of this week. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
Those housing plans come after the Eby government unveiled big changes to improving public safety. Over the weekend, EB announced measures meant to reform the way violent offenders are handled in the criminal justice system, saying the province will deploy response teams of police, prosecutors and probation officers to focus on those deemed repeat offenders. EB also announced changes to how mental health cases are managed by frontline workers and says BC will add 12 mental health response teams in communities across BC, some of which will be Indigenous-led. A large majority of caregivers of children on the autism spectrum are worried about the changes the BC government is making to funding services. That is in a new report that surveyed more than 1,500 families.
Change is often very difficult or even traumatic for autistic children. They rely on routine and those established relationships with their service providers. They have that bond and that trust there, and dismantling that can be traumatic for autistic children.
BC overhauled its system by phasing out individual autism funding and replacing it with family connections hubs across the province by 2025. But 96% of families say they wouldn't choose the hubs to help their children, as it would pull them away from their current service providers. The group Autism BC is calling for the government to maintain the existing services and programs until a policy review is done. 7 commercial poultry farms in the Fraser Valley have now tested positive for avian flu. 6 farms are in Abbotsford, 1 in Chilliwack. BC's Ministry of Agriculture says those farms are all under quarantine. The ministry says risk of avian flu rises every spring and fall as birds migrate to and from our province. The highly pathogenic flu was confirmed between November 16th and 19th on the farms. The government says it's working closely with farmers to protect their flocks. One measure is to continue farming operations indoors. Well, they're often remote communities cut off from energy grids and most often Indigenous. That is the case for Bella Bella, where for years the town has relied on diesel for heating. But as Camille Vernet from our French language service Radio Canada explains, they're going to go green to try to reach energy self-sufficiency.
Surrounded by fjords, signs of change are popping up all over the seaside village of Bella Bella.
These few solar panels have the ability to actually power all of Kansut, all of our wellness center here.
This mother-to-be is proud of the Halsuk First Nation for making climate change action a priority.
Our goal is to have energy sovereignty as a nation, and part of that is the solar project.
Solar panels are just one of 10 solutions proposed by the Nation Climate Action Team.
We are a small community of about 1,600 people. Our carbon footprint isn't huge, but what we hope is that other communities, other municipalities can look at what we're doing and they can recognize they can also be the change.
Getting the community on board was instrumental in making the big switch and getting the money to make it happen.
Solar panel D. Where we now have successful funding to put solar panels just like here in Kansut onto our school, our community store, and our hall.
We have run aground here.
The transition was sparked by a disaster back in 2016. A barge crashed, then sank, spilling thousands of liters of diesel into pristine ocean waters.
When the Nathan E. Stewart ran aground, it was a huge shock for our community. It brought into the community consciousness just how real the risk is when we are shipping in oil and diesel to heat our community and meet the basic needs of our community, when today that's simply not a risk that we have to take anymore.
So step 1 for the team, putting an end to fossil fuel delivery by boat.
So we're about 75% converted for all of our homes in Bella Bella from oil to heat pumps.
And home renovations were completed to better insulate homes. And it's not just the environment coming out ahead, families as well.
The average home is saving $1,500 per year on heating costs and producing 5 tons less of greenhouse gas emissions per year per home.
The nation is also looking into vertical farming and biodiesel for marine vessels.
Some really beautiful things happening already.
Bella Bella is receiving federal funding to transition, but the team says they shouldn't be one of so few.
And I was so proud to be in Ottawa to accept this funding announcement along with these other progressive nations. But I know that this is a unique story and shouldn't just be a beautiful, unique story. It should be the standard. It should be the bare minimum for every First Nation, for each community really within Canada, that we're making a difference for our future generations and our relationship to Earth.
Pillow like a cloud.
Hope that Bella Bella's green transition will inspire others to follow. Camille Vernet, Radio-Canada, Bella Bella.
When it comes to his legacy around the environment, now former BC Premier John Horgan says he took a practical approach around emissions and projects, but his record has plenty of critics, from forestry to his decision to allow the Site C Dam to continue being built. As Yasmin Gandam tells us, climate campaigners hope Premier David Eby will accomplish more.
We need, as a society, to recognize and acknowledge the territories that was expropriated from the First Peoples who have been here since time immemorial, and I think all British Columbians get that.
Before he became premier in 2017, then opposition leader John Horgan had plenty of criticism for many of the Liberal government's environmental policies, like the Site C Dam, liquefied natural gas, and forestry. But once in government, many of those policies remained. Horgan allowed Site C to continue despite opposition. Ken Boone felt left down. His farmland in the Peace Valley was expropriated for the mega project.
You know, we had such great hopes that, you know, finally maybe the project would be killed, and it just didn't happen.
Climate campaigners agree.
It's a very important milestone that we have the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act in place now, but it's overshadowed by a number of big industrial projects that are going forward. Particularly LNG Canada, the Site C Dam.
More than 2 years have passed since the province released its Old Growth Strategic Review, the work of 2 retired foresters. It made 14 recommendations to change how logging is done in BC, specifically prioritizing the health of ecosystems. One of the authors says he believes Horgan made strides, but the issues are just too vast.
Because there's no lack of intent and willingness to do this. It is just way, way harder than we thought. And so many things happened that we hadn't anticipated that caused delays.
The hope is for Premier David Eby's government to continue the work and prioritize climate change. But climate advocates say time is ticking.
It's not the same becoming a premier in 2022 compared to 2017. There's now even less time to take strong climate action.
Eby says he would like to continue to build on clean energy work. Yasmin Gandam, CBC News, Vancouver.
Time for our first peek at the weather. Johanna Wagstaff is off tonight. Kuljeet Kaila joins us with the forecast, and that precipitation appears to be returning. Is that right? That's the word in the street?
That is the word on the street, and it's finally happening. It's going to start tonight. On top of that, we've got some snow coming as well for the Caribou region. Parts of the Okanagan, some alerts have been issued for the Coquihalla Highway, Rogers Pass as well. Up to 15 centimeters of snow expected in the next 24 hours or so. So we're keeping an eye on that. Temperatures across BC, we had some areas where it was warmer than usual and some areas where it was colder than usual as well. So Fort St. John and Fort Nelson saw warmer temperatures, so we're still seeing that trend as well. Across the province tomorrow, like I mentioned, snow for Prince George and Williams Lake, some sunshine, but wet conditions for Dease Lake and wet conditions for most of British Columbia. Outside right now, 8 degrees in Pitt Meadows, 7 at the airport, and we're going to be seeing the sun rising tomorrow morning at 7:33 with some rain, which will start at around midnight and continue on into tomorrow. I'll have details of your 7-day coming up, Dan.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kuljeet.
You're welcome.
As the days get colder and darker, more people are spending more time indoors. That means a higher risk of exposure to viruses like RSV, the flu, and, of course, COVID. To help make sense of what's going around, we're joined by Dr. Melissa Lem. She's a family physician and clinical assistant professor at UBC. Nice to see you again, Doctor.
Great
Thanks
to be
for
back,
being
Dan.
here.
Thanks.
Who are right now most at risk from this sort of triple whammy of respiratory viruses?
So in terms of contracting
RSV, flu, and COVID-19, we're all at risk right now because there are high levels of all three in the community. But in terms of who's most at risk for severe consequences, RSV and flu in particular, young children and older adults are people who are more at risk because they have lower immune system function usually, and also people with pre-existing conditions like heart disease and lung disease. With COVID-19, typically we see the most complications in people who are unvaccinated and also elderly people. The younger cohort tends to be not as severely affected, but that said, we are seeing higher rates of complications and just hospitalizations right now because of the combination of all three.
Now, beyond COVID, which you mentioned is the protection of vaccines obviously is paramount for people who get it. How do you tell the difference between flu and RSV? If you can.
I know this is hard because they all cause similar symptoms like runny nose, like sore throat, fever, cough, feeling unwell. That said, there are some subtle differences. So with RSV, the onset tends to be a little slower, whereas with flu, it tends to hit you like a ton of bricks right away. With the flu, you also tend to be a bit sicker if you're in that middle age range category, so higher fever, more lethargy, whereas RSV, again, tends to hit those really young kids, so those under 6 months, harder.
We've heard the term immunity debt. How is that factoring in right now, particularly with we no longer have mask mandates, we no longer have a whole bunch of other protections that we used to have before?
I really dislike this term immunity debt because I think it's misleading. And it's this concept that people's immune systems are weaker because of masking, because of distancing, and because of the public health measures that we've taken. And this is wrong. So our immune systems are not like a muscle that get weaker, when we don't use it. In fact, we're exposed to pathogens all the time, every day, from the food we eat, from people we touch, from the soil we touch. So our immune systems are constantly being stimulated. That said, the idea that kids haven't experienced as many viruses over the past couple years is true. So we are seeing higher levels of all three, again, of these viruses right now because they haven't been exposed. That said, there's something a little sinister, some people think, that might be happening with COVID-19 in particular. And this is emerging evidence. It's not set yet, but there's a thought that being infected with COVID-19, in fact, harms your immune system. So impairs interferon production, impairs T cell or white blood cell production, and actually makes it harder for you to fight off these run-of-the-mill viruses like RSV and flu when you get them. So this is a story that's emerging, and it underlines that idea that we have to reduce transmission of COVID-19 as much as possible.
And lastly, quickly, we have concern around for parents and guardians who can't get that pain and fever medication we're waiting on. We know there have been shortages. Are there other options that they can take for their youngsters if they don't have access to those drugs yet?
Well, you can take adult medication very carefully. You have to look up the weight-based dosing, look up the age ranges, and break it down into doses that your kids can take. But one thing I want to underline, too, is not every fever is a bad fever. So a lot of parents kind of think once your fever hits a certain level, it's dangerous. That's not true. It's, in fact, what goes along with the fever that we worry about, like dehydration, like lethargy, like vomiting, or just being unwell and cranky. So that would be a reason to medicate your child with a fever, not just the fever itself. So keep that in mind, too.
Good advice. Dr. Melissa Lim, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thanks.
It's called the metaverse, a new advent of the digital world. And Vancouver is at the very forefront of this new frontier. So what is it, and how do we define it? We're going to dive into the metaverse after this. And thank you for being here on our commercial-free live stream tonight. Alberta is becoming more of a hotspot for winter attractions as Calgary plans to host a global racing event next February. And a Canmore Hotel Group has bought property to build a Nordic spa. As the CBC's Dave Gilson and Helen Pike report, Alberta tourism industries hope those initiatives will be an economic boost during the winter season.
We've seen it again. We saw this last year with supercars.
The Nitro Rallycross event will run February 4th and 5th during Calgary's Chinook Blast Winter Festival. Organizers say 1,000-horsepower electric vehicles will race on a snow and ice track at the Calgary Stampede Grandstand. They add it will also include entertainment and opportunities for the public to meet competitors from around the world. That includes Jamaican driver Fraser McConnell.
Just as exciting for the drivers as it is for the fans to watch. And, the cars are flying, more than 100 feet on any given track. And just bang turns, lots of dirt spray, in this case snow spray, and it's a wild ride.
The motorsports series was created by American action sports figure Travis Pastrana. Organizers say the event will include a worldwide broadcast. Carson Ackroyd with Tourism Calgary says the plan has been in the works for a few years and that it means an entertainment and financial boost for the city.
This is a truly unique event on the calendar in terms of racing to have cars on ice, and we think adding that to our winter festival mix will drive that many more people to come and visit our city during the wintertime, not just the summertime.
Mid-corner to get in front, he takes the lead again, brilliant driving.
Dave Gilson, CBC News, Calgary.
Basecamp Resorts has secured a location to build a Nordic spa in Canmore. CEO Sky McLean says plans include on-site lodging, food, the classic pools, and a mud bath.
I've always felt that Canmore really needs more experiences for people who don't necessarily want to hike up to that peak or mountain bike for 18 hours. People just want to come and enjoy the mountains and have some peace and quiet.
Scandinavian hydrotherapy has become the latest fad in the Rockies. Kananaskis Nordic Spa has been open since 2018. Group Nordique announced another spa just west of Calgary, the Harmony Spa, which has a projected 2025 opening. Elizabeth Torney-Booth is a freelance lifestyle writer.
Because I know the one in Kananaskis, like, people get anxious about going out there because it is kind of, they reach capacity and then you can't get in. And so I think that'll maybe calm people a little bit down if there's more options.
The plan here is still in its early stages with the hope to break ground on construction next year. Helen Pike, CBC News, Canmore.
It is the forefront of our digital lives, and Vancouver sits at the very front of it, with innovators playing in a world that's still very much being defined. We're starting an 8-part series today about the metaverse. What is it, and what might it do? We asked some local creators.
What is my definition of the metaverse? This is really hard because I feel like, it's still being defined.
To me, the metaverse is the next internet. It's the internet, but you're in the internet rather than looking at the internet, and a lot more interactive. Rather than pressing keyboards or moving a mouse, it's now going to be about hand gestures and about using your body to interact with content or to engage with content.
Everyone has like a digital identity, especially our generation. Like everyone lives on internet. We're slowly transposing into this virtual life that we're all living on Instagram, on Twitter and stuff like this.
There are maybe different characteristics that I would define as the metaverse in terms of persistent digital identity, where you're able to, play, work, shop, and be in on a regular basis, which we already kind of do online, but it's something that's a bit more immersive.
We will be using metaverses in the same way that we're using Web 2 applications right now. Instead of having Zoom calls, you're going to be in the metaverse having those meetings.
A lot of people think that the technology will bring us further apart, but I actually think it'll connect us closer together.
Well, there's a revolution going on in rec rooms, offices, and classrooms around the world. A revolution in which 15 million people are taking part. They're sharing scientific data, arguing philosophy, or passing on cooking tips and gossip night and day through a computer network called Internet.
Nobody says, hey, I'm going on cyberspace to google.com. But there for a little while, cyberspace was a catch-all for people who weren't directly involved in the kind of emerging internet ecosystem to say, hey, something big is coming down the line. I can't quite articulate it, but I think it's really important to be able to name it And that's kind of what the metaverse is. There's a lot of tools, functionality, changes that are coming towards us, and we can feel that energetic momentum, but people don't right now have the language to break it into the actual specifics of changes, and so it's easier to have an umbrella.
The real metaverse really hasn't been fully realized yet. It's going to be like the internet, where you'll be able to go into various metaverses, but there will be one centralized metaverse that isn't controlled by anyone. It's controlled by the people, which is really intriguing to me.
It's basically the sum of all virtual experiences, frequently connected to real-world experiences. We're probably dealing with more of a series of metaverses than a single metaverse. I think probably the best example of a metaverse right now could well be, video games like Fortnite. As these other forms of entertainment and other forms of activity start to come into these worlds, it's probably no longer only a video game.
Think about sports events, gaming events, musical concerts, comedian shows of any sort. These things are going to be happening in the metaverse, and the people that own the spaces are going to be the ones that build the future and also probably profit.
A lot of the metaverse will be powered by Web3.
Web 1 was these static websites that you saw on AOL, or you had dial-up internet, and you go there and you read a few things and then you kind of leave. Web 2 was this evolution of these different services and apps. That's when the iPhone came out, that's when apps like Uber and Airbnb came out, and it's improved our lives significantly, made things more convenient. Web 3 is this idea that the internet itself is evolving. People are taking back control. We are in the middle of a digital renaissance, and all different sectors of creation, they're all going to explode in enabling young people with great ideas to make a living doing so.
It's not just about applications and data, right? It's about creativity and art. And it's really cool, being a technologist and entrepreneur, is that I get to work with artists all day, right? I get to look at art, create these cool mechanics, and just really think about, what the world wants.
There's going to be people who pave the way, and there's going to be learning along the way, and I think that's the big thing right now is people are just exploring.
This is kind of the shift from, mobile computing, the internet into Web3, which will permeate throughout our daily lives and will affect almost everyone in the world.
We're off. Under clouds of controversy, the Men's World Cup has begun, while the games continue to generate headlines off the pitch. That's next.
For 5 years, Jim and Bev Day's backyard and house in Surrey have been a hospital for injured birds of prey. Now the cages are coming down. The days are moving. This place just isn't big enough anymore.
We've outgrown our backyard, and we've outgrown the house. Where we're moving to has a huge shop on it, all insulated. So, lots of times when we get busy, I end up playing, musical cages and musical rooms. The only one in the house that hasn't had birds in it has been the bedroom.
The days started out breeding and looking after domestic birds. Then a vet gave them an injured red-tailed hawk. That got them started nursing birds of prey back to health. Mostly they get owls. This is the first to be moved.
Got lucky. Whoops, only one. Here. Thank you. Settle down. Put your wings in.
The Day's new home is on 3 acres in Surrey. They need the space. What started out as a small backyard operation has become a non-profit society that nursed 150 birds last year. Now they'll be able to handle even more.
Well, with what we've got here, and if funding comes in, we should be able to handle up to 400 birds at a time here with no problem.
Is there that much demand?
Well, hopefully not. But we've had just in birds of prey, 30 birds on hand at one time, and that's an awful lot of birds to look after.
With the extra space, the days will also take in songbirds and ducks, something they didn't do before. And they plan to stay at this new site for a while.
I could never stop doing it.
You just like helping birds?
I love it. I really do. They're gorgeous, you know, and their personalities are also different. Each one has a different personality. All the injuries are different. You hardly ever end up with the same injury or like that. You know, it's beautiful. It's a good feeling.
The Days say they need volunteers and material like old plywood to get their new location going. Anyone who'd like to help can call the Owl Rehabilitation Society at 591-9573.
Qatar's record on human rights made it a controversial choice to host the Men's World Cup. And even though the tournament has now begun, as Thomas Dagla explains, that controversy is not fading.
Qatar isn't known for soccer or protests, but on the World Cup's first full match day, it witnessed both. England's team taking a knee against inequality before the opening whistle. That part was planned. The replacement armband on Captain Harry Kane, an unexpected switch.
I don't think the World Cup should have been in Qatar, so these things are not surprising to me.
At this London pub, they enjoyed England's win despite the last-minute complication. 7 team captains had vowed to take the field wearing this rainbow One Love armband in a host country that considers same-sex relations criminal. But all those teams abruptly backed out.
I think it's amazingly unfair of FIFA to put them into that position.
Soccer's governing body threatened to punish the players, each with a yellow card, if they wore the armbands unapproved by FIFA. And 2 yellow cards means suspension for a game.
This is not a player's decision. Imagine going on the pitch with a clear yellow card to start with. That is not possible.
U.S. and Canadian officials weren't keen to speak up either ahead of meetings with Qatar's deputy prime minister. Canada's international development minister was even asked why criticism of this country can seem like walking on eggshells.
For Canada, this is not about walking on eggshells. It's about having a constructive dialogue for progress.
Before Iran hit the pitch, Iranians brought their country's protests all the way to the World Cup.
To show our support for the country and the people, but not the support for the regime.
In what was widely believed to be their own protest during the national anthem, the Iranian squad stayed silent, seemingly speaking volumes.
Before the tournament even began, FIFA warned teams to focus squarely on soccer. In this country, freedom of the press is not guaranteed. Neither is freedom of expression. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Al Rayyan, Qatar.
Relief tonight that a nuclear disaster has been avoided in Ukraine. UN officials say shelling around Europe's largest nuclear plant hit dangerously close to some of its reactors over the weekend. And as Briar Stewart reports, it's still not clear which side of the war is to blame.
This unverified video purports to show the Zaporizhia nuclear plant under attack again. The plant, which is under Russian control, is near the front line. Both sides blame each other for the repeated attacks. We all need guaranteed protection from any Russian missiles and Russian sabotage at nuclear facilities, said Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Kyiv regime does not stop its provocations with the aim of creating a threat of industrial disaster, said Russia's defense ministry. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency says whoever's shelling the power plant is putting people's lives at risk. Even though there was no direct impact on key nuclear safety and security systems at the plant, the shelling came dangerously close to them. We're talking meters, not kilometers.
I don't think
In the unlikely event there is a radiation leak, the potential impact has decreased since the beginning of the war, says this expert.
If the plant was hit, what's the biggest risk?
even if it would happen, it would be, especially now, 2 months after the reactors were stopped, much less than Fukushima. That's, let's say, 20, 30 kilometers around the nuclear power plant there.
Leon Sejan says in Ukraine, the bigger risk for residents is living so close to the front line. This man rescued his mother-in-law from the rubble of one home destroyed this morning. In the north, snow blankets some buildings that were bombed months ago. On the outside of one, a mural by the renowned graffiti artist Banksy. This drawing makes me feel as if I've cleansed myself of the dirt that's descended on us, this woman says. It's a small comfort to residents here who are getting by with only wood-burning stoves and facing the start of what's expected to be a very brutal winter. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
We have new details tonight in the deadly shooting at a gay nightclub in Colorado Springs. Police have identified the 5 victims who were killed. Their pictures were released earlier today. The 22-year-old suspect has not been formally charged. Along with murder, he could face hate crimes charges. Back in this country, it is the start of a big week of testimony at the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act. Today, the head of Canada's spy agency says he recommended the government invoke the legislation during the convoy protests last winter. As Marina von Stackelberg explains, that was after documents showed the agency did not initially think the situation met the bar as a national security threat.
For the record, please state your full name.
The head of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, also known as CSIS, says he felt the Emergencies Act was required. And he says he told the Prime Minister that directly. The advice came the day before the government would bring in the never-before-used legislation. It gave sweeping powers to authorities to shut down protests. It was February 13th. Downtown Ottawa had been occupied by convoy protesters for 3 weeks. Borders to the United States remained blockaded. The Prime Minister held a special meeting of cabinet and experts. At the end of the meeting, he asked CSIS Director David Vigneault what he thought.
He advised the Prime Minister of his belief that it was indeed required to invoke the Act. And again, you remember saying that during the closed session? Yes.
To invoke the Emergencies Act, the government must believe there is a threat to Canada's security, one so serious it's a national emergency. It needs to endanger the lives, health, or safety of Canadians, and must be so major local authorities can't deal with it. The inquiry has repeatedly heard evidence that earlier on, the CSIS director did not think the convoy posed a threat to national security based on its own criteria. But Vigneault testified he then learned the Emergencies Act used a broader definition of a threat. So that night he told the Prime Minister, based on what he was seeing across the country, the bar was met to invoke the Act.
We know the Act fairly well, of CSIS Act. I was not familiar with the details of the Emergencies Act.
Last week, 2 senior government officials, the clerk of the Privy Council and a top security advisor, both testified they also recommended the government use the Act. And now cabinet ministers have begun to explain why they decided to invoke it.
I don't want to minimize what was going on in Ottawa by any stretch of the imagination, but right across the country, particularly as it pertains to critical infrastructure, for me, elevated the situation to a national emergency.
This is the most anticipated week of the inquiry. The public will finally hear from those who ultimately made the decision to invoke the Act. That includes top-ranking cabinet ministers and the Prime Minister himself. He's set to testify on Friday. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Hundreds of people are dead and many more trapped after an earthquake rattled Indonesia's main island of Java. The search for survivors after this.
Chunky twist, bubbles, and barrettes. She stands from her seat, shaking. Bullets of hatred shoot out the barrel of their pistol-like mouths. Tell her that her coils are ugly and unkept, that she'll never amount to anything. She stands in front of the class and says, I am the seed of my wildest dreams. I am the seed of my wildest dreams. I am the seed of my wildest dreams. You see, sometime before, this little girl decided to stand up tall, be proud of who she is and where she can go. So one foggy morning, she buried herself deep within the soil. She would check on herself in the garden every day, allow in the sunlight so there's no decay. What grows beneath the surface? Only she knows. The roots of her ancestors flow beneath her toes. She waters herself with the tears she cried when they said she didn't exist in the dark. But her skin is strong. This girl has layers like sycamore tree bark. Over a decade later, this young girl has bloomed, even when the world has told her she's doomed. They don't know God made this girl stronger than ever and gave her a mother to endure the stormy weather. Now this girl is protected and well-respected, cool, calm, and collected. See, this little girl got moxie, that je ne sais quoi, that spice, that drip, too hard to turn the faucet off. Love shines down on her like a glorious sun, highly melanated, looking like a victory won. I planted this seed in the back of my mind, so I may one day enjoy the fruits of my labor. My confidence is no longer thick smoke and vapor. The little girl in 4C is meant to be praised. She walks to the front of the class. Despite the taunting and torment, she remains unfazed. She stands in front of the class and says, I am the seed of my wildest dreams and will continue to grow for more seasons to come.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
Officials in Indonesia say an earthquake has left more than 160 people dead and hundreds more injured. Many were being treated in hospital parking lots. Ambulances are still arriving late into the night. It happened on the central island of Java, less than 100 kilometers from the capital of Jakarta. Search and rescue operations have been hampered by scores of aftershocks. Officials believe they will find more bodies. Time for our BC-wide weather forecast, the full version with Kuljeet Kaila as we tilt into the precipitation once again.
Yes, we've seen scattered showers all day today and more on the way, starting at around midnight tonight, and this will last through the week. We will see plenty of rain coming in with this low pressure system making its way across most of central BC and the south coast as well. Rainfall accumulations of between 30 to 40 millimeters over the next 24 to 48 hours. If we break it down across the lower mainland, looks like the Tri-Cities will be getting the most, up to 75 millimeters of rain by the end of this week. So rain for tomorrow, a risk of rain for Wednesday and Thursday, more coming on Friday, and then the third wave kind of coming on the weekend. For the 5-day or the 7-day forecast, temperatures still around in the double digits for Thursday and Friday as we get that second swoop of rain. It'll get a little bit reduced. 7 degrees for Saturday and Sunday, and it's going to get cold at night. 3 degrees is what we're dropping to. And by Monday, the sunshine does return, but it will be quite cold outside. So you do want to bundle up. You're going between umbrellas and big snow jackets to umbrellas again.
Mittens, turtlenecks, scarves.
All of it.
You name it. Bring it on, folks. Dig it out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kuljeet.
Thanks, Dan.
The people of Davis Inlet made global headlines in the 1990s after the former community located in northern Labrador was struck by tragedy. Images of addiction and despair were seen around the world. And as the CBC's Ariana Kelland reports, the Mushwa Innu First Nation is still dealing with unfulfilled promises from the federal and provincial governments.
A lot of good and bad memories here.
Gregory Rich is the former Grand Chief of the Innu Nation. Davis Inlet was his home.
The house fire, it's on the hills there.
On Valentine's Day 1992, Rich's 5 children and another child died alone while Gregory and his wife weren't home. It's part of a tragic history in Davis Inlet. International attention in the early 1990s on the health and addictions crisis that gripped the community forced Ottawa's hand, and the feds promised to move the Innu to a new community of their choosing. They also promised to decommission Davis Inlet. This December marks 20 years since the Innu moved from Davis Inlet to Natwashish, but Davis Inlet remains as it was.
When we signed the relocation agreement, we assumed and thought that that will be completed, but now decommissioning is one of it that part of that's not completed.
Last year, the Canadian Human Rights Commission tabled its third blistering report outlining failures by the provincial and federal governments in their treatment of the Innu of Labrador. Decommissioning Davis Inlet is a repeated recommendation by the Commission.
And as formal discussions start on land claims.
But the greatest failure, the report says, is that Ottawa and the Innu still have not reached an agreement on self-governance. 30 years now and counting.
I do not expect the negotiations to be easy.
Former Conservative MP Peter Panashaway has been at the negotiating table since the 1990s.
Is it trust or is it racism? Right? Racism to me is that one group of people feel that they're superior over another group. They know what's best for the other group. And I think that's what's happening.
As the community and the feds begin to work to take apart Davis Inlet, the key to the Innu's successful future still lies in wait. The Government of Canada says it acknowledges the existence of systemic racism and that it recognizes that it is crucial to conclude this agreement between Canada and the Mushwa Innu. For those looking in, Davis Inlet was a symbol of despair. But for Gregory Rich, his feelings for this place are complicated.
Even though I suffered a great loss, but I miss this place sometimes.
Ariana Kelland, CBC News, Davis Inlet.
NASA has returned a spacecraft to the moon's orbit. The pictures captured, and what's next for the mission? After this.
Mosaic Potash has lied to my people because they can. In this province we call Saskatchewan.
People from the Kakawishtahoe First Nation are angry. They say the Mosaic Company has not provided any meaningful benefits to them, even as the mining giant continues to pull millions of dollars of potash from the nation's traditional territory. Chief Evan Tapetot is speaking out.
Kakawishtahoe First Nation has built a business thinking we would be able to participate and employ our members and other surrounding First Nation workers through trades like welding and pipe fitting and other trades, only to be completely shut out.
Mosaic operates 3 potash mines in Saskatchewan. Many are close enough to be seen by the residents of the First Nation, but they say they haven't seen the resource's benefits. The chief says instead of awarding millions of dollars in contracts to a nearby metal fabrication plant partially owned by the band, that Mosaic has given the work to companies in other provinces. And he says that's not right.
They'll throw you breadcrumbs, they'll throw you trinkets and beads, and then they think you're going to go away with your little profit you made.
In a statement, Mosaic said its Indigenous partners are the key to its success and that it wants a constructive and engaging relationship with surrounding communities. All of this comes on the heels of a new piece of legislation, the Saskatchewan First Act, which is meant to confirm the province's jurisdiction over its natural resources. But critics say it also infringes on First Nation treaty rights and the duty to consult.
Mr. Speaker, this government does take duty to consult seriously, and that's exactly what we're doing, Mr. Speaker.
But for residents of Kakawishtahow, that's not enough.
We're here for the future because we're never going away. We're always going to be here. And we've got to learn to live in harmony and to share those resources.
The people here want a fair deal, one they're still waiting for. Alexander Kwan, CBC News.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. CBC British Columbia's annual Food Bank Day returns on December 2nd. Join us for special broadcasts of your favorite CBC Radio 1 programs and fundraising for BC's food banks. And enjoy candlelit carols and joyous holiday favorites at Christmas with Corleone, December 16th to 19th. Celebrate the season and get your tickets at corleone.org.
NASA's Orion capsule has reached the moon's orbit after it was launched last Wednesday atop the world's biggest rocket yet. The capsule sent a video as it whipped around the far side of the moon. There's Earth as a small blue sphere. At its closest approach, Orion was about 130 kilometers from the lunar surface. It soared high above Tranquility Base, where humans first walked on the moon 53 years ago. The capsule will spend a week in lunar orbit before it heads home. Orion, with its test dummy astronauts, is expected to splash into the Pacific on December 11th. Back on Earth, Montreal is home to a lot of history, and a church there, faced with losing a piece of its own, has hit upon a unique way to preserve it. More now from Simon Nakaneshny.
They were cast in 19th century France, brought here at great effort and expense, and for decades served as a sonic signal for people to congregate. So when André Papatoma found out the Archdiocese was about to demolish his church's water-damaged bell tower, he sprang into action.
I proposed at l'Archevêché to install the bells in the church to save them.
But it wasn't so simple. The bronze beasts can each weigh more than a pickup truck, so the first step was to make sure the floor could support the load.
It's probably the only one place in the world where the bells are installed in the church.
There was also the matter of how to ring them in an enclosed space, even one as large as this. Letting them swing freely would be deafening. The solution, special mallets, like this one made out of a dumbbell.
So I can give it a shot, and just right there.
Yeah.
Harder.
Give it hard?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, I guess it's not going to break.
No. Yes. And you also hear this note, which is an harmonic of the C.
Yes,
okay?
right.
It's an F.
The new percussion instruments now figure prominently in a series of concerts featuring 4 percussionists, a choir, and another musical part of the building's architecture.
When you bring these bells, which are really linked to the building, I mean, they're a part of the architecture of the building, and you bring them into this space, then it has this really special connection, I think.
And while bringing and ringing the bells inside is a novel concept, for many who hear their sound, they're more than just a novelty.
The sound is just it fills the room. Wow, I don't know. I didn't really think of putting it to words.
It's really profound, these sounds. They really touch you and they really bring you to the present.
And still serving their original purpose, drawing people together to experience something awe-inspiring. Simon Akineshti, CBC News, Montreal.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube, Instagram, and our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is at 11 o'clock tonight with Benit Brach right after the National. Have a good night.